Welcome, one and all. Thank you for your patience. This is the Peace Dealer, and it is time for part two of our Love and Sex webinar series, where we will be speaking about Mars, and we'll be learning about the power of desire. Thank you guys very much for your patience, and we will get right into it. For those of you who have questions during this webinar, please stay tuned for the Q&A that we will have after. So during the question, just write down the questions that you have. Hopefully some of them will be answered during this webinar, but make sure you choose your best question, and then I will answer that at the end in the webinar conclusion. Right before the conclusion and before we do the Q&A, we will have a short Mars initiation where you'll take your knowledge of Mars after the webinar and we'll commit to some homework and a special exercise so that you'll initiate yourself into this new understanding of Mars. For now, for those of you who are live in the chat, comment your Mars house and comment your Mars sign. And I want you to interpret it. I want you to really, write what you feel or think or know it means for you. And then what we're going to do at the end is I'm going to ask the same question and we'll see if you understand it a little bit different or the same, and it just confirmed what you already knew. We're going to uncover once again the power of desire. So let us hop into the time-space loop. See, back when I was a kid, I saw Steve do this in Blue's Clues, and it was so easy for him. Like all he had to do was just do this corny dance, and then he can jump into his PowerPoint. But now I just have to use Google Hangouts, and we can create a time-space continuum, and it's all Gucci. For part two, you know what I'm saying? And you'll be in a very amazing position to step into this PowerPoint land with me. So as we uncover the power of desire, we will look into, throughout this webinar, a short look into the mythology. Then we will uncover the states and the elements of power and desire. Then we will look at Mars' influence through the signs and through the houses. After that, we'll look at some aspects, and then we'll go into some advanced sexual techniques. Before concluding with the initiation and the Q&A. When you think of Mars, Mars once again represents masculine sexual desire, to where the sexual energy doesn't just apply to just physical intercourse. When I say one of my biggest sexual fantasies is just walking into my room or the kitchen and just seeing Cinnabon and spaghetti and all sorts of unhealthy foods that'll probably unreasonably raise my cholesterol, just salivating, ready for me to devour. That is an expression of my Mars, to where Mars in general, in its core, is inherently sexual. Anything that you desire is an expression of your sexual intent. Interestingly enough, a lot of how we have been conditioned to express our desire by the Dark Ages influence with religion has stunted Mars's ability to kind of express itself. Or, Mars could be heavily distorted and corrupted. But you'll see in this new age of Aquarius, as people understand more their Mars and understand Mars in what it really represents, you'll really understand Mars as more a an agent of the divine masculine, but in some cases, the divine feminine too. With that being said, when we look into the mythology of Mars, Mars is classically hailed as the god of war. And this, of course, is indicative in many stories, movies, video games of how Mars will not only wreck your crap, but go on the battlefield and just like not really beat you up, but destroy you. Like really destroy you. And it, of course, being one of the most prominent and worshipped gods, gives it the popularity that you see mirrored today. Even in the most recent Wonder Woman, where Ares was literally the antagonist, always trying to kill something. It's like, what's up, Mars? He is the son of Juno and Jupiter. So, keep that in mind when we get into the astrological significance. The son of Jupiter, which rules Sagittarius, and Aries is fifth house to Sagittarius. But the Romans worshipped Mars as the god of spring and growth in nature, as well as fertility, and the protector of cattle. It definitely speaks to the progression of how he started off as an earth god, then eventually became a god of death, and finally a god of war. Despite the mythology, when we look at the astrological significance, Mars definitely does hail supreme significantly as the prime indicator of desire, period. And this is one half to the equation of love. At its most basic form, love ultimately is a lot more complex, but when we look at love, we don't just look at Venus, who has been falsely labeled as the goddess of love. Nothing against her. That's Venus goes hard. That's the OG right there. But we can't just polarize feminine energy and almost sexualize masculine energy to represent solely sex, guts, war, and like anger. Such expressions are symptoms of the repression of divine masculinity and the distortion of patriarchy. As in this new age, let's say, people begin to unsuppress or really heal that masculine energy, both men and women, you're going to start to see more evolved expressions of Mars that definitely reflect a greater control and mastery of desire and the execution of power, which once again Mars represents. So this isn't to take away that the primal sexual drive that you feel or motivates you to want to have sex with someone doesn't come from Mars. But it's important to not count out that element when you speak on love. Love primarily isn't really just vanilla. So it's important to say, because I did call this love and sex to indicate how Venus more carries the love end and Mars indicates more the sex end. But you want to actually, in some cases, see how both Venus and Mars will indicate love and sex, because Venus indicates what pleases you during sex. It's explicably just pleasure. And when we talk about Mars, it's desire. Pleasure and desire are like different octaves of the same thing. You know, sometimes people have Mars and Venus conjunct in the same sign. So their pleasures and desires are very similar, if not the same, if not linked. In fact, it may be hard for them to tell apart. Some people it's squares, some people it's different, you know, and this is what, when we go into part 3, we'll get into. But another key thing to keep in mind when you think of the zodiac sign Scorpio, this is another sign that kind of represents the wisdom of desire. And it's important to mention Scorpio because this is where Mars finds its ancient rulership. And if anything, there's some ancient texts that will ascribe the rulership of Pluto to Aries, while Scorpio is just Mars. And there, when we go into Mars and Scorpio versus Mars and Aries, I want you to really keep in mind the difference of how they both express themselves. But regardless, Mars in its essence will represent the drive that motivates you to accomplish anything that your will intends. If your Mars is debilitated, you may find you don't really do anything, or it's hard to harness that energy. Versus if it's very powerful, you're able to get a whole lot of what you want. So as we start to shift in to understanding how Mars is different for everyone, since everyone has Mars in their chart, but not everyone expresses Mars the same way. I mean, if it was that simple, we wouldn't have most of the issues that we have. Um, you know, it's a really common hope that with further literature about this and with more awareness, if everyone knew where Mars was in their chart, theoretically it would really be great to see that a lot of conflict is resolved, because you know, it's like before you smack someone else upside the head, you can just be like, oh wait, I understand this person's Mars. I know why their desires clash with my desires. Now, unfortunately, this is real life, and that just would never really change that much, because before you beat someone upside the head, the last thing you're going to care about is what their Mars is. And it's specifically because of Mars and Pluto that we'll never be able to reach any such type of resolution until, of course, we refine both energies. This is how controversial desire is, to where every single thing that has really become a power issue stems from the misabuse of this one planet. Okay. Just like Chad Taylor said, "Hey yo, B, what's your Mars?" And you got your hands up. Before I punch your face, what's your Mars? Because if it tries my Mars, we can squash this right now. Like, that's just never gonna happen. Oh, you never know though. But anyway, when we look into the states of power, Mars definitely helps gain execution in raw to strategic ways. So it still is very beneficial to know someone's Mars, especially if you're one of those astro creeps like me. Like, you just have to get someone's time of birth, and you just have to know someone's planet, or you're just not even, you know what I'm saying? Screw getting to know someone normally. Like, let me see where your Mars is. Like, come on. Cuz this is one of those personal planets that if you know someone's Mars, and if you know how it aspects, their actions are predictable. And more importantly, even if you don't know what house Mars is in, or if you don't even know how to interpret the sign, well, you would actually have to know the sign for this one. But even if you don't know what house is in, if you at least know what sign it's in, and I mean, even if you don't know how to interpret the sign, once again, if you at least know the state of Mars, this will tell you considerably how, not only how to approach and act with this person. And I don't mean not how to act around this person. So I don't necessarily mean how to like put on a mask and act, but how to actually engage with this person. These people will also feel rapport. When you understand someone's language of desire, it adds a lot of power, but it also will keep you in mind to how they act, what their motivations are, and once again, what they desire. So sexual force is very much so experienced when Mars is in a cardinal sign. These are the most powerful people. Everything they do has force. Do you hear me knocking on my desk? I have Mars in Aries. This is force. All right. So the cardinal energy is very much so pronounced. Aries, Cancer, even Cancer, where traditionally it's in the fall. It's very sexually powerful and forceful and passive aggressive emotional ways that you would never believe. And then Libra and Capricorn, where it's exalted and it's controlled, but still like immovable. It's impossible to stop. So once again, the thing with sexual force and Mars and cardinal signs, they pioneer ways forward. But once again, this adds power with it. And the sexual force comes with impact that definitely applies such girth of experience, but more importantly, uh once again, a force to be reckoned with. You want to think of these three different states as like flavors, because there's definitely like different versions of this. Where sexual force may be too direct for some people, People with sexual force know how to direct sexual encounters, and they're very, very, very straightforward about their sexual desire. Even in the case of Cancer that's passive aggressive, they'll be very straightforward with their passive aggressiveness. They'll be like, so you know what, I kind of, one time I kind of felt like I wanted to have sex. I'm just joking. I won't do Mars and Cancer like that. They're not that passive aggressive. But yes, it's very direct. And when we now get into sexual magnetism, however, this is where we step into Mars in the fixed signs. It's a very subtle effect, but it's like ridiculously sexy. Mars in Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius. Once again, there's this magnetism. Since it's fixed, there's a very stubborn nature to how these people they don't necessarily express desire like those in cardinal signs, but they definitely harness this energy. The desire, the element of desire is now energetically harnessed to where there's a magnetic effect to how they can focus on the desire and allow it to literally, bring things to come to them. If you notice Mars in those signs, it's very hard to let go of those people because literally Mars is inverting itself, especially in the case of Taurus and Scorpio, where a lot of this fixed energy really, once again, brings with it a much integral, deep sense of attraction. For those with sexual magnetism, sex isn't something that you do. It's definitely it's something. It's a quality that you have. Not even. It's not necessarily an act as well. Although these people are ridiculously stubborn. Like once they've decided on something, you really can't get them to compromise. Like this is the one like position where even the sun, like even if you're a sun in Scorpio, you can get a sun in Scorpio to compromise. You just have to like really give them like really great sex, and then in that moment where they're like stuck in between ridiculous orgasm, you get them to compromise. And then they'll try and change their mind later, but it'll be too late because once they say the word, they do. But you cannot get Mars and Scorpio to compromise. It's impossible. And trust me, you can't get Taurus to compromise. You cannot get a sun or moon in Taurus to compromise. Now, on a good day, on a very good day, you can take Moon and Taurus to their favorite restaurant when they're in a good when they're in a good mood. All right. You buy them, you wait till they're hungry, you just buy them a good meal. All right, really, really good. And Sun and Taurus is way easier to get with this. And then at the peak of their happiness, you know what I'm saying? You hit them with the compromise. They will know what your game is, but they will appreciate you took them to the food. They will compromise. It's just with Taurus, you can't do that over and over. You can only do it once. So make sure you wait for the good friend to do it. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh, you're good. Mars and Taurus, they're not compromising. They're not compromising. If Mars and Taurus wants to have sex with you, they're having sex with you. And that's it. If Mars and Taurus wants to have sex with you, it's a wrap. Like, and don't underestimate them either, because they're going to focus their everything on doing that and having that until they're done with you. That's how magnetic Mars and the fixed signs are. And then, of course, we have sexual magic. Doof, 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 doof. That's the only sexual class that actually comes with its own sound effects. Mars and Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, and Pisces. Don't sleep on Mars and Pisces, although it's like impossible to not do that. But sexual magic is inherently subtle. We shift away from the quality of sexual energetic experience to just pure sexual experience, to where once again it's not about what you do during sex, it's not about what you gain from sexual experience. Sorry, it's not what you gain from sexual intercourse. For sex magic, it's about the experience. And it could be, this one's subtle once again. So it could be difficult for some to master. Sexual magic is really one of the only Mars positions where the compatibility has to be right. With Mars in cardinal signs, even if the compatibility isn't that right, it's because they're so forceful, they're going to really direct it in the ways they want to fulfill their desire. And with sexual magnetism, they're really more about the receptivity or just the harnessing of their energy. Sex magic, you either like it or you don't, because the subtle element of the magic they possess with the experience of their desire could be missed on a lot of people. You know, sex between Mars and Pisces and Mars and Sagittarius is very much so um different than with the other signs. You may find in trines they'll actually work because sexual magic brings with it technique, but also, you know what I'm saying, a magical experience. But once again, if you don't really see magic, if you don't really sexual, those who have sexual magic could be very misunderstood, because if you don't really perceive magic, it's very perceptual. Someone with sexual magic at that, um they may be less interested in the sexual act and more interested in the experience that leads up to it. That's the type of way to engage with these people, especially when they express their desires in unique ways. It's not going to be so direct. It's always going to be based on the experience and moment at that time, which makes it not as consistent, but once again magical in how it really reflects the current moment. As such, it's the most unpredictable type of sex magic. And once again, you never really know what you're going to get. With sexual force, what you see is what you get. And with sexual magnetism, it, you know, you'll kind of feel into that. But with sexual magic, you never know. And it's different every time. It's different every time. Sometimes it could be literally like the most garbage. I mean, the most like weird or lame. Sometimes it could be greater than you could have ever imagined. Like, holy crap, tard buckets. Wow. And that really, once again, takes into account the magic nature. Once we now step into the elements of power, the elements of power are going to borrow on the states of power that are experienced, but now flesh out in a different sense and dimension the elements that show one's style and type of expressing it, despite the state. Of course, this represents the elements of fire, water, air, and earth. And this is also significant because once again, if your knowledge of astrology is limited, if you know the element and state that they are, you can literally combine the interpretation of both so that you're in a position to once again understand greatly how the style of element is similar versus the state of power that exudes this desire. As we start with Mars and Earth signs, Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn, this, of course, is expressed in sensual desire. It's not necessarily as gut wrenching like you'd see in a movie, but very, very productive and constructive and practical. Sensual desire is all encompassing on a very physical level. It's the type that your senses reel for. And people with their Mars and Earth signs have a very grounded approach to how they take action and what they desire. So it's not really going to incorporate anything that's not already real and can't already be worked on. It's not the most exciting. I'm not gonna lie, but it does at least account for, once again, more common sex. I mean, oh shit. Oh damn. Once again, more common sense. Damn. And also a more realistic approach to what it is that you are willing to create with that energy. But I mean, let's get to the fun stuff because this is the type of sex that people kind of, you know what I'm saying, see in the movies and think of when you think of Mars, sexual desire and even soul desire. All right. When we think of the fire and water elements of Mars, respectively, we look to sexual desire and we look to soul desire. But that passionate, rev you against the walls desire is sexual desire. Mars and fire signs. It's to a degree where everyone at some element kind of likes this, but to varying degrees. Keep in mind, when Mars is in this energy, like when Mars is in a Earth sign, this is the type of desire that they desire. So when Mars is in a fire sign, these people want that passionate sexual desire. These people want fun in the expression of their desire. The power they exude is that which charges them up with energy and acts off of how they feel at that peak. Whereas with sensual desire, they can take action they need to take action from a more grounded place. Once like that fire and passion is gone, it's going to be really hard to motivate someone with sexual desire. Okay, keep that in mind. If you know someone has Mars in a fire sign, before they're going to do anything, they have to feel passionate about it. If you can't get them passionate about it, they're not going to do it. If you can't get them passionate about having sex with you, good luck. Okay. Versus with sensual desire, they don't, those people being passionate, of course, will do the trick, but it's really more a sense of security and groundedness that will really more so indicate, once again, your ability to exhibit a greater desire in practical things. You know, for example, like Ethernosis said, someone with the Mars and Taurus, if you were to get all hot and heavy and bothered, they might take offense to that. But if you ask them, hey, can I buy you some donuts and tacos? They literally might get hot for you. A Mars and Taurus may literally get hot for you if you ask them if you can buy them tacos and then drive it to them. Oh my gosh, they'll start touching themselves to you. levels. There's levels to this, my friends. So sexual desire, you have to get passionate, okay? You can't really just do with Mars and an air sign, you can have a conversation and that'll be it. That's really cool. But Mars in a fire sign, like you're gonna have to bring that desire. You're gonna have to bring that passion, okay? And not just that passion. There has to be an adventurous streak to this. All right. Soul desire is not far off from the truth. The difference between that, though, is if you bring all that fire and passion to Mars in a water sign, Scorpio, Cancer, and Pisces, they're not going to mind the heat, but they're going to want to know, do you have any depth? Me's likey depth. I like beneath the surface things. Can you show me more? Do you got that? Do you got that? Like people with Mars and these signs don't even care about your boundaries. They're just gonna go straight under your rug. They're just gonna go deep in your soul. Just be like, do you got anything there? Like these people are not fond of shallow people. And the deeper you are, and the more you kind of express this more emotional side of yourself passionately, the better. Oh my gosh. Mars in Pisces is just wishing to for somebody, or Mars in Scorpio is just wishing for someone on a rainy day to just be outside their window and just be playing the guitar and passionately expressing their desire emotionally. That's really the only difference between Mars and fire and Mars and water. Mars and water is like being able to just sing your heart out and just be like, I'm so in love with you, Susan. The way I love you just makes me feel amazing. I'm not that good at it because I'm dead inside and I have barely little to no emotion. So the whole notion of water Mars just makes me puke inside. It's just like, oh my gosh, this is just overbearingly romantic and it's cute, but no. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Let me not throw shade like that because it's actually a great testament to the power of one's emotions. Like that's not easy to do, especially see the bad side of Mars in water is just being overbearingly like emotionally manipulative and passive aggressive. But when you do this the way it's supposed to be, it's very powerful because it's hard to be vulnerable and just actually be open with that sensitive side of yourself. The water Mars is making a comeback and it's actually the most seductive Mars because you passionately connect with someone at a soul level. You do this to someone with Mars there, they will literally like hit the splits for, I mean, they'll open up their soul to you. Then we have cosmic desire, okay? Mars and air signs, Gemini, Aquarius, Libra. Cosmic desire is a little different. The desire that they express is purely mental. It's very much so sapiosexual. The Mars and air signs are very much so the sapiosexuals of the zodiac, where the sound of your voice and your vocabulary and lexicon could literally be the key to you like scoring if we're going to use a very cheap way of Mars. Mars is not a scorer. Mars is a warrior that will kill you, but still. Um, what I appreciate about Mars and air signs is they're really not pressed up for sex for real. Like whereas Mars and fire signs and water signs could really be desperate for sex in some cases where they can get really horny, Mars and air signs would rather just talk. Like they desire more communication. Like they can go without sex. Like in fact, if they can withstand like passionate pressure, although they're very liberal with sex too. So it's not like the Mars and the Earth signs. In fact, Mars and air signs can get accused of being what's the word? They could be accused of being promiscuous. Mars and fire is inherently promiscuous because they believe in the freedom of sex. If they're not, it's because they have other stabilizing energies that get in the way of it. But if Mars and fire can have sex with everything, they would, and they wouldn't even be ashamed of it. But Mars and air, they're not really promiscuous, they're just liberal. So the whole notion of having sex, it's not, they're not attached to it. It's not like Mars and water that gets attached emotionally with sex. Like, it's hard to have sex with somebody who they don't have a soul connection to. Mars and air, it's liberal. It's nothing that's really that deep for them. So they can get turned off by people who are overly sexual, because if you can't open up their mind, then you're not really going to unlock their desire. You have to be intelligent. Once again, these are very sapiosexual people. So you have to be able to not only stimulate their mind, but in the case of all cases, the level of which you could take their mind and paint a creative picture and really engage and help them learn new things, this really does turn them on. It's ridiculous. If when you speak to a Mars and Gemini or Aquarius, you put them on some great knowledge, they will. And then not only that, you also kind of express verbally your sexual desire. Oh, it's a wrap. They'll do the same to you. So as we get into the signs, okay. And let's just go back. That's very true. One common stereotype of Mars and the air signs is they talk a lot. Oh my gosh, if someone has their Mars in the air sign, they literally they literally can talk forever, especially if it's like if you see like a Cancer with their Mars and Gemini, or a Taurus with their Mars and Gemini. Oh my gosh, don't be fooled, because at first they'll look like, oh, they don't talk a lot, you know what I'm saying? But once they open up their mouth, it won't stop. It won't stop. Especially if they like trust you or they like you. Oh my god, you can tell if a Mars and Gemini is sexually attracted to you because they'll talk to you a whole lot and they'll share their ideas. So keep that in mind as we go into Mars and Aries. Mars and Aries is the usual archetype and the problem starter. Whoop whoop! Shout out to the Mars and Aries Club. I love having a Mars and Aries. Mars and Aries is one of my favorite positions, even though this is the one position that is the reason I get in so much trouble. And I'm not gonna lie, even though Mars gives with it a primal force and an original instinctual energy to it that just can never be copied, it's so dumb. It's so dumb. It's so dumb. Like, unless you're an Aquarius or a Capricorn with it, good luck. Because, like, with Mars and Aries, you're talking about the will to just express yourself instinctually without even thinking. The shit's kind of scary. I have it like square Uranus exact, so I can literally just do the most unpredictable stuff before I even know. Like, oh, I'm not gonna blame that, but despite it being the dumbest Mars position, it's still one of the best. What adds to the dumb element of it is its willingness to not really think. Like, because it's so instinctual, it's not going to give time to literally think about things. It's just going to act off of primal base instinct. And like Lilac Ocean 420 says, it scares the crap out of my earth. Like, once I start thinking about stuff I've done, it's like, holy crap. So I'm just gonna blame Mars for like everything that I've done dumb in my life. But it is what it is. it's not so much the Aries energy. I sometimes say Aries is dumb, but it's not so much the energy of Aries that's dumb. It's misabusing the Aries energy and not really understanding how. Okay. Mars in Aries once again acts on impulse, and its desire is sparked very excitingly. Although once it's sparked, it could very much so lose interest. So the key with Mars and Aries, of course, is not to try and keep interest, which is a common trap. This forward moving energy wants to never really die down or stop. So, once again, the forcefulness of such represents the one's willingness and ability to take actions are based off of one's own original and authentic identity. It's very personal. A lot of Mars and Aries could be very selfish because they're only going to their primary mode of desire is instinctually based on who they are and what they want and desire. Although Mars and Aries is the classic 1-2 pumper, like because there's a lot of that force initially until one's Mars and Aries progresses into Taurus. These people are best at having sex in like 5 minutes. Once again, it's a very selfish energy. So it's like once they get theirs, if you didn't get yours, sorry, not sorry. Sorry, not sorry. Gotta go. You gotta go. Goodbye. That's like quintessential Mars. Once again, once this progresses into Taurus, the Mars and Aries starts to now develop stamina. But even in the case of, and this is, both sexes, even women with Mars and Aries, like it's they very much so love quickies. They want, once they feel it, they definitely want to, experience it. And this makes this such a dynamic sign. However, once again, once we're talking about duration and sex, no. And once again, it's not so much that Mars and Aries can't last long. It's that they don't desire to. It's like sex more than like 5 minutes is like, or 10 minutes is like meaningless. Unless, in the case, unless it's like with Mars and Leo and Sagittarius, where sex magic or magnetism now adds to the experience. All right. But, if you're looking for a lot more length and duration, Mars in Taurus. Mars in Taurus, unfortunately, lacks the dynamic force that Mars in Aries possesses. But one thing Mars in Taurus will have that Mars in Aries may never have is the finishing and staying power to be able to actually not only last, but at a very central level of pleasure. What Mars and Taurus desires is the acquisition of material goods. And so there's a central element to including this in a sexual act that can take the quality of sex to a whole different level. Mars and Taurus is the zodiac sign to where you can have like sex in bed with dinner or breakfast in bed / sex. That's an extreme example, but you can eat food in the bed while you have sex with a Mars and Taurus. Like that'll be very tantalizing to them. Ways to appeal to a Mars and Taurus, once again, is to appeal to their senses. Handcuffing and blindfolds work, but you really want to look more into whipped cream, cherry, scented massaging oils, Making sure you smell very good. A Mars and Taurus, similar to Mars and Virgo, is not going to be caught dead having sex with someone who smells, because the physical body and temple has to be pristine so that all of that energy can very much so be appreciated. Whereas Mars and Aries, Mars and fire signs is savage. I'm not gonna lie. Mars in a fire sign, I'm so sorry. Mars in a fire sign could literally like have sex with someone who hasn't had a shower in like 2 days. They don't give a damn. Like if they feel in the moment, they'll probably like put a paper bag over something or just clamp their nose, but do it. Mars and the Earth signs, no, they kind of, they're definitely, since they're too sensual, they can't. You know what I'm saying? Uh Once again, there's a very subtle and central dynamic to Mars and Taurus where they express their desire sensually through touch. And especially if you know that someone has a Mars and Taurus, massaging them or touching them in erogenous zones very seductively is a very, very powerful way to seduce them. This, once again, is what they will do to seduce you. They talk with their hands, although these people have hands. Don't sleep on Mars and Taurus. Mars and Taurus can fight. Mars and Aries can fight, but they fight in a more direct way where if you get hit, you could probably get knocked out very quickly. Mars and Taurus has hands, though. They definitely know how to speak with their body language, and they're really good at throwing and chucking stuff at you. A Mars and Taurus is the mom with the chancla that will hit their child in the head, even if they're on the opposite side of the room and there's a wall in the way, and they just use it like a boomerang, and the chancla comes back to her. That's Mars and Taurus. It's ridiculous. So appealing to this sensual side is what will very powerfully and strongly add to the power. Whereas Mars in Aries is powerful, Mars in Taurus is strong. You cannot shake the will of a Mars in Taurus. And once they've decided to do something and once they've desired something, they will not stop desiring it until they have achieved it. So it can take them time to desire something. The desires it grows slowly, whereas Mars and Aries can instantly be turned on by something, and just as quickly, instantly, like, never mind. I thought I liked this. Mars and Taurus is going to have that endurance that will slowly build up until it finally reaches its timing, and then bam, you got a wild bull on your hands. Oh, snap. Oh, snap. And that's another cool thing about Mars and Taurus. They can take you to climax and then keep you there. Don't sleep on Taurus, y'all. Taurus is one of the best signs of sex. So then we get to Mars and Gemini. Mars and Gemini, first up to sex magic. I underestimated Mars and Gemini. I'm kind of biased because I am a Gemini, so it's a little bit different. But Mars and Gemini is more psychological than it is mental, since it's about the experience of words. As such, similar to cosmic desire representatives who have Mars and air signs, they are the hardest to please. It's the hardest to please Mars and air signs. And out of all the Mars and air signs, the hardest to genuinely please is a tie between Aquarius and Gemini, because you not only have to stimulate the mind of Mars and Gemini in this case, but you have to be able to constantly stimulate this. Mars and Gemini has a mind that is constantly buzzing with information so quickly, and you could give them your all, and then like 2 hours later it's like, is that all you have? Like, I can go to the internet. It's not really bad. I don't want to really throw shade there because it kind of integrates the experience a lot. Although with Mars and Gemini, they can get a whole lot of nothing done. Unless it involves reading and literature, the way they take action is the way they can command with their words. And once again, the way they apply their thoughts. Although, if you get into an argument with a Mars and Gemini, that's literally your ass. They will take their words and they will jam them up orifices in your body, and it's gonna hurt. If sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Don't say that to a Mars and Gemini, or they will just say three words and you'll be crying. You will be crying. Like, don't piss up. Don't get into an argument with a Mars and Gemini, because you don't even have to be wrong. You don't even have to be right. Like, even if you're right, you still won't win. Like, they know how to evoke anger through words. But once again, once you stimulate their mind, this is what opens up at length a lot of this sexual energy. It's not necessarily as if they don't get sexual. It could just be difficult if their mind is not stimulated. And as such, a Mars and Gemini is going to want someone to mentally guide them along the process of this mental stimulation. You'd be surprised. See, just talking dirty to a Mars and Gemini is really more Mars and Aries than you would think, because it's very direct. All right. Telling someone, yeah, I want you to do this. I want you to take these honey buns and I want you to eat that honey bun. Yeah, I want you to lick all of that glazed off of the honey bun. It's so bad for you, isn't it? Yeah, I want you to eat all those calories down. Oh yeah. See, there's a subtle difference. You know what I'm saying? Mars and Gemini does not necessarily want like direct sex talk, because the way to really stimulate a Mars and Gemini is to project your sexual intent, but through words, to where even if you're not necessarily in a position, you know what I'm saying, to directly express it, if you can express it through what you're saying, it's crazy. Mars and Aries, that is really a Mars and Taurus thing, I'm not gonna lie. But if we're using honey buns as an example, because I don't want to use explicit terms, you know what I'm saying, the direct talk with Mars and Aries is gonna be more, yeah, I want to take that honey bun and I want you to shove it down your mouth, and I just want you to eat it, and just not even eat it politely, and just scarf it down and let the crumbs brittle down. That's Mars and Aries. Okay, Mars and Taurus is, I want to just get all the honey buns. Screw just getting one honey bun. I want to get the whole pack of honey buns, and then we can warm the honey buns in the microwave so they're just nice and soft and they're glazed. You know what I'm saying? And then Mars and Gemini is an even like more complex version of this, where you're just going so into the honey bun vernacular, and you're talking about the depth of the glazed energy, and then you start getting into the philosophy of how honey buns have shaped the culture, and just opened up so much, and to the point where you've just unwrapped the meaning of life by talking to about honey buns. um you never know. The Mars and Gemini might not be sexually aroused, but you have something to talk about. But regardless, though, Mars and Gemini is a tricky placement, and they really get off on playing mind games with you, especially if there's irritation mentally. If you find that there's mind games played, it's because Mars can very much so frustrate the mental, which is now inhabited by this god of war energy. So it's just an indicator of a hyper overactive mind. Mars in Cancer now is not necessarily as bad a planet as you think. I think KRS KRS in his interpretation of Mars in Cancer did it justice. And he kind of pointed out how, in some cases, you know what I mean, Mars in Cancer, even though it's debilitated, is actually sorry, even though it's in its fall, in this day and age, might actually be the preferred Mars to have. So you want to keep in mind the traditional interpretations of a planet like Mars were based off a traditional time where, when it comes to emotional manipulation and projecting feelings, that represents an emotional sense of intelligence that's a lot more useful now. Mars in Cancer is going to really harness a very deep power in how passionate one is with their feelings. In some cases, Mars in Cancer isn't really some crybaby that cries when they get mad. They can get very emotionally passionate, and I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of murderers have Mars in Cancer, because once they get in their feelings and once they get deeply passionate, this definitely takes their anger and boils it in a pot. So it's not like Mars in Aries that can just erupt at a moment's notice, but eventually that fire will simmer. Mars in Cancer is going to brew. They're going to sit on that feeling and keep that grudge, and they're going to let that water boil. And once it's they pour that on you. And similar to Mars and Taurus, that's what happens during sex with them too. They facilitate the duration of this experience with a whole lot of emotional, passionate energy that gets you in your heart, and the way they can nurture you. It's Mars and Cancer isn't necessarily um as emotional as it is when it's done right. When Mars in Cancer is done right, you have a very seductive individual who knows when to express their feelings and how to do it in a sexual way, because they can express their emotions in sexual ways too, that evokes to the feelings of men and women. But it's not something for everyone. Like for someone who's more mental, that could be a little bit corny. They may not want to be in their feelings. But for those who do, it's definitely because they can sense into the intent of what people feel. It allows them to engage with this. But Mars in Cancer, like any water sign, is subtle. A lot of people don't understand the passive aggressive element to how they can project their feelings towards you and then also subtly manipulate how you'll feel, because through the time space continuum they project these unseen frequencies. All right. Someone with the Mars in Cancer, if they desire you, they'll project that desire towards you and you can feel it. And if it's powerful enough, it can make you do things, especially if they cloak it. So then when you try and do it and you ask them or you try and do it, they'll act like, oh, I'm not that interested. But yeah, if you want to, it's very subtle. It's kind of like Mars and Scorpio, just more direct in a very indirect way. Believe it or not, to appeal to a Mars in Cancer, you don't really necessarily need to be emotional. You might want to be in a position to hold your ground. Mars and Cancer are actually attracted to people who have emotional control. Anything that allows them to fully release their feelings passionately definitely opens them up to you. But once again, if they haven't mastered their feelings, people who have Mars in Cancer could be a little bit of wimps. I'm not gonna lie. They could decide to wait until the appropriate time to lash out on their anger instead of handling it then and there, which does add a bit of strategy to it. But once again, they could really just have emotional outbursts of passion that really do things, but in more emotionally manipulative ways. At its best, though, there's a sexual element of nurturing that could be quite addictive when you master the Mars in Cancer. And the subtlety can go a long way. Mars in Leo now is definitely the bee's knees. Mars in Leo has this sense of royalty where you have to know what they did. Like you can't just not you can't not know what a Mars and Leo did when they're with you. They will make their presence known. This is very much so like in the fifth house, the porn star, where the sexual act for them is a quality of profound love that incorporates their whole heart. They're not just going to have sex with you. They're going to take it there. It's going to be a production, similar like Mars and Sagittarius. And there's going to be a very profound exuberance to this show that involves all the stops. You can't be with the Mars and Leo if you're boring. Like I have a Venus and Taurus. I just want to kind of like watch Netflix and not all the yeah, I kind of just want to watch Netflix and eat bacon. You know what I mean? That could be boring to a Mars and Leo that's like, come on, be entertaining. Like, what's good? Let's get in the moment and put on a show. And the key feature to Mars and Leo is being able to keep on their level. It's not so much that you have to be the most entertaining person, but if you can keep up on their level and keep the love exciting, because in Leo, it's not like Aries, which is why Mars and Aries and Mars and Leo work very well. Mars and Aries can keep that excitement, and Mars and Leo can sustain that excitement so that the fire doesn't burn out, making it very exciting, very fun, but also very vibrant. Although, if drama is too much for you, the Mars and Leo could be excessively dramatic, either out of boredom or just because they put their heart into everything. And that could be too much for some people. And Mars and Leo will burn the burn if they go to war with you or if they go to war with your sexual organs. But this is definitely the one Mars energy that will utilize one's talents ridiculously so. And once again, as long as you bring that passion, this is an overall really fun Mars position. Kind of works with other Mars very well. Mars and Virgo, not so much. Mars and Virgo is one of the most discriminatory Mars ever. Oh, but is it perfect? In fact, people with Mars and Virgo usually have a specific type of technique. It's very similar to Mars and the Six that they employ. Like their sexual taste is very particular. And similar to Aquarius, it's very unique to them. But if you think Venus and Virgo makes someone picky, it's actually Mars and Virgo that makes someone super picky. And this pickiness, once again, is discriminating in a sense where you can't you can't just go bare minimum. You can't just be savage like Aries and show up smelling like BO. Like there has to be a integration of your style to where you're at least palatable and constructive. Even though Mars and Virgo is very analytical, strategic, and it's still magic in how they can adapt to the experience. They don't mind being lost in imagination if your hygiene is on point. Don't hit up Mars and Virgo if you don't even know how to use a tongue scraper and like your breath smells. They will give you the side eye and you'll see the Mars and Aries come out of them. They'll beat you upside the head. In their head, of course, not in real life. Mars and Virgo, though, is very strategic and they're able to sync their action with their analytical ability, which makes them low key monsters and also very seductive. These sensual masters are not only able to apply sensual touch, but they know just how to touch you, they know just where to touch you, and they really drive home the sensual experience of a moment so that they bring into account every little thing. Keep that in mind because in order to appeal to a Mars and Virgo, it's important that you know the details and not the details. You don't have to know the details really because if you're not a Virgo, you're not a Virgo, and a Virgo will understand that. If a Virgo gives you a chance, or Mars and Virgo gives you a chance, and you're not a Virgo, let them do the Virgo stuff. Like they can handle that. But all you have to do is appreciate the little things. They don't want to do all the stuff and all the little stuff they do is oblivious to you. This is why Virgo hates Sagittarius and Gemini. It's like you have to really notice the little things they do, otherwise the magic they create is not going to make sense to you. You're just going to be like, well, this is boring. Mars and Virgo can come off very boring, but the only reason why they will is if you don't notice the details they put in to relatively simple actions that aren't really as simple if you pay attention. I think the only one as subtle is Mars and Pisces. Okay. So Mars in Libra is also very seductive, but just in a more subtly manipulative way. It's not necessarily like Mars in Cancer that will want you to feel how they feel and Mars in Cancer and Mars in Pisces are notorious when they want to do stuff. Instead of doing it, they'll like ask you. They'll be like a Mars in Cancer and Mars in Pisces will be like, "Do you want to go to the store or do you want to do this?" And Mars and Libra can be like that too, where it's like, "Hey, do you want to go to Saks Fifth and shop for clothes?" And it's like, "I don't even go to that store. You sure you didn't want to do that? And you're just asking me so I make the decision?" Welcome to Mars and Libra, where it's very hard for a Mars and Libra to take independent action. Not that they can't, but what they desire to do is to do things with other people, even if they're by themselves. It's not that they can't do stuff if they're not by themselves, but the way they take action is strategically based on what others do. So if a Mars and Libra is by themselves and they're driving on the road, they're going to take actions based on the cars around them. Where a Mars and Aries might recklessly try and cut someone off because they drive based on their own personal selfish desires. I'm a reckless ass driver, I'm not going to lie. But Mars and Libra, once again, is going to do the opposite of that. They're going to, especially sexually, they'll cater to your pleasures, which Mars in Cancer and Mars in Virgo can do too. They can cater very profoundly to your pleasures. Mars in Libra desires to balance out your mode of expression. There's a purpose here. It's not necessarily in its worst, it can really shed one of identity. At its worst, Mars and Libra, it's not that they have no desire, but if you ask them to do something, it's impossible for them to know unless they know what you want to do. Because what they want to do is based off of what you want to do. If you ask a Mars and Aries, what movie do you want to see? Oh, I want to see Doctor Strange. And then I want to see this movie. If you ask a Mars and Libra, they'll be like, well, what do you want to see? Or what do you want to do? It's not that they don't know what to do, by the way. Although they'll be hell of indecisive and they'll want you to choose for them because it's just easier that way. But they genuinely desire to do things based off of what the other person in the equation wants them to do. Even if they have to create an imaginary friend to do so in some cases, like if this is in the 12th house. Mars and Libra sexually, as such, similar to Cancer, is not going to really want someone who's trying to do what they, if you try and play Mars and Libra to Mars and Libra, it may not work. Mars and Libra is going to desire people who are independent and on their own because they want to balance someone out. You want to really present to Mars and Libra your complete self because they'll definitely be able to collab very well. To stimulate the mind of a Mars and Libra, your social skills and ability to communicate with others is what will actually turn them on. So Mars in Aquarius, Mars in Gemini is going to deal more with conversational ability and what kind of knowledge is instilled and connects. Mars in Libra is going to be more like if you can introduce them to a powerful friend or someone else that's cool, your social skills, you can stimulate their mind, but what can you do with that information? If you can take out a Mars and Libra and be the most popular person there, which you don't have to be, but they definitely like socialites for this reason. This now stimulates their ability to engage with other people. And not even in a way that's promiscuous, too. So once we now shift into Mars and Scorpio, I would say out of all the Mars, the only two Mars positions that carry the most primal, raw sexual energy that you can feel when evoked and is near irresistible to handle is Mars and Aries, and even more so, Mars and Scorpio. Mars and Mars and Scorpio is able to intensify that spark that Mars and or Aries has. When Mars and Aries sparks that desire, it burns way brighter and hotter than Mars and Scorpio ever could. But Mars and Aries will never last as long as Mars and Scorpio. Mars and Scorpio kind of brings this energy to a more addictive element as their general expression of sex is very psychological. Mars and Scorpio, Mars and Aries is the one that's just gonna smack your tushy in broad daylight, if anything, and just be that savage to where that hyper masculinity kicks in. Mars and Scorpio is gonna wait until no one's looking and just very lightly caress your tushy psychologically, where they're speaking in a normal way, but it's really having you feel the built up sexual energy that they have once again started to harness. The Mars in Scorpio is constantly desiring sex and building up that sex, but not necessarily in a way that's too raw where it's expressed passionately. A Mars in Scorpio can sit on a sexual desire for a long while and let it build, and you can feel that energy. as such, it adds a dark element to how they express this, but also how they deal with anger. Mars in Scorpio, this is one of those Mars positions as well as Mars in Taurus where someone, if you betray them or if they're mad at you, you won't know that they want to kill you until they want to kill you. Only because of the way the law is set up. Mars and Scorpio, like if you betray a Mars and Scorpio, if you cheated on their partner, if you treated with the if they're part, if you did some stuff like that, they may even be willing to smile in your face if that's what it takes to inevitably kill you. Because the Mars and Scorpio, once they resolve to kill you, you're dead. It's very similar to Lilith, and very similar once again to with sex. Once the Mars and Scorpio has targeted you, oh, they will take their sweet time seducing you. And their emotional manipulation works in an advanced way with Cancer to where they can sexually string you on intensely and play with how deeply you desire them based on the intense harnessing and projection of that desire. So this definitely allows them to be psychologically strategic. You can play this with them as well, and with your ability to not necessarily express too quickly your sexual intent. If you can stay mysterious, this will pique to their curiosity to want to go deep within you. A Mars in Scorpio is going to want to completely devour your soul whole. And you have to really take your time with merging very deeply with them at a soul level. Interestingly enough, Moon in Scorpio is a lot like this too. It's the feminine version of Mars in Scorpio, not Venus in Scorpio, the Moon. It's one of those only rare combinations. So Moon conjunct Mars in Scorpio synastry is so tantalizing. It's ridiculous. Oops. Mars in Sagittarius now. This is the wild man's Mars, or the wild goddess's Mars, the fire goddess. Mars in Sagittarius is definitely the hoe of the zodiac, the proud hoe of the zodiac. Mars in the Sagittarius is all about free sexual activity. This isn't necessarily, it's very possible for a Mars in Sagittarius to be faithful, believe it or not. But Mars desires freedom in their sex life. And they definitely want to have fun with sex. It's very easy for Mars and Sagittarius to have four ways or five ways. The magic of their desire is one that can be experienced very powerfully and positively as they have a wanderlust and sense of adventure to where the element of sex to them cannot be predictable, and it can't just be in one place. Every time they have sex, it adds meaning and a new pace and sense to their place. What I'm saying is, if you're with the Mars and Sagittarius, make sure you have sex in a different place every time. You don't have to, but switching it up is the name of the game. But it's not as simple as just switching it up. Similar to Mars and Leo, you have to be able to exhibit a performance to where you a lot of this happens on a whim. Like Lilac Ocean said, they really do love car sex. In fact, if you can have sex in the car while the car is moving, oh my goodness, you will win their heart. You'll probably almost die, but that exhilaration will be everything they've ever wanted anyway. And this is what makes Mars in Sagittarius very dangerous. They like to push the boundaries and the elements. It's very important that when you deal with Mars and Sagittarius, you don't stop them if you try and limit a Mars and Sagittarius, it can really get in the way of how they really desire you. All right. Mars and Sagittarius isn't that dangerous. Sometimes they like to play Russian roulette. Sometimes they like to play with wild bears. Okay, sometimes you actually have to stop Mars and Sagittarius because if you don't stop them, they won't stop. They're very similar to Mars and Gemini. It's just Mars and Gemini will not limit themselves to the topics or the sexual energy of what they think. With Mars, it's what they show. And Mars and Sagittarius has no shame in their game. They desire what they desire and they'll be blunt about it. So I'm not going to lie, someone with their Mars and Sagittarius is the easiest to have sex with. Just say it's almost as easy as Mars and Aries. Just say you want to have sex with them and they'll have sex with you like that, just like that. I mean, unless they don't, you know what I'm saying? But they can say they don't want to have sex with you, and then if you just like play their favorite song and then touch them in the erogenous zone, bam, they'll all of a sudden like touch you back, and that was very creepy and cringy to say, but oh my gosh, like let me just rephrase that. Mars and Sagittarius may not want to, and then of course they'll change their mind. Remember, Mars in mutable signs is very mutable. So whereas if a Mars in Taurus or a Mars in Scorpio says no, it's going to be really hard to change their mind. Mars in Sagittarius, all right. See, Lilac Ocean just confirmed. She said, I told him we're having sex tonight. And he said, okay. Like, they're super down. In fact, if you're not careful, if you try and hit them with the passive aggressive stuff, that turns them off a lot. They really like that direct energy and they really like giving them that excitement to where you really don't hesitate and you're also very blunt and exciting. Okay. You want to pace their experience. It's not necessarily as liberal as Mars and Gemini to where you can write a poem. No, I'm just joking. That better be a good ass poem. But Mars and Sagittarius is liberal and fun. Okay, because once again, like they're very they're very adventurous, and just like Margaret said, you know what I'm saying. She has a Venus in Sag, and she has a Mars in Sag, I believe, and she's faithful. So it's very possible to meet people who are faithful with Mars and Sag. You'll find that they save the freaky behavior to committed relationships and then they go super wild with the partner that they're with. So definitely keep that in mind. If someone has Mars and Sagittarius, you don't want to believe they're automatically a hoe because it's going to be other planets that determine it. But just strictly Mars and Sagittarius on its own, this is the hoe. Like they're going to have sex with you and then your friend, and then they're going to ask you if you can have sex with their friend. And yeah, it's pretty cool, not going to lie. Now we'll get into Mars and Capricorn. Mars in Capricorn is rightfully exalted, it could be although sometimes it could be very limiting. Mars in Capricorn, believe it or not, is an extension of Mars in Scorpio. And Mars in Capricorn could definitely be as seductive as Mars in Scorpio if they let loose and they're not too rigid. Where Mars in Aries fails to restrain themselves, Mars in Capricorn has that perfect restraint to where they're very powerfully able to really, gain deep and powerful influence. Mars in Capricorn is powerful in a very influential way to where their force is definitely very subtle and indirect, but still undeniable. These days, hoes get promoted to housewives every day. Just look at Amber Rose and Cardi B. No, I'm just joking. Please don't kill me, Amber Rose and Cardi B. Please don't kill me if you ever read this or listen to this. It was a bad joke. All right, Mars in Capricorn, once again, is going to indicate a very powerful element of control that definitely indicate, once again, how well you can utilize one's material resources to engage in desire. As such, I think no other sign than Mars in Capricorn and Mars in Taurus, but definitely Mars in Capricorn, um, understands the whole notion of paying for sex. Mars and Capricorn won't even waste their time. Mars and Capricorn walk up and be like, how much do you want? Honestly, even if you're, whether they're a man or a woman, and just be like, all right, I don't have time to waste. I have shit to do tonight. How much do you want? Give me 30 minutes. How much do you want for 30 minutes? It's very controlled, direct, as is. In a perfect world, you know what I'm saying? This may express itself like such, but you can't hit a Mars in Scorpio or a Mars in Pisces with that. You have to engage their imagination, right? And like Diane said, Venus and Capricorn will also have the escort preference. Venus and Capricorn will more likely be an escort because if we're talking about the receptivity of if you're talking about the receptivity of this, although not every Venus and Cap is an escort, not every Mars and Capricorn pays for sex. In fact, in another sense, Mars and Capricorn can indicate someone who's going to work really hard for sex, and vice versa, to where if you want to have sex with them, you have to really work hard at it. And it could, like Mars in the earth signs, indicate one that desires status. A Mars in Capricorn may not necessarily want to be with you, even if Mars in Capricorn is one of those positions where even if they actually like have a passionate sexual attraction to you, if you're like not popular, if you're not powerful, that'll turn them off. Like you have to be able to utilize your social influence. And a lot of this desire has much to do with, once again, power, which gives high standards to what the Mars and Capricorn desires. But the way they utilize this desire, once again, could be very much so influential. Definitely being organized in your approach is a great way to appeal to Mars and Capricorn while still strategically employing the right amount of sensual grace, right? Power is very sexy to a Mars and Capricorn. Even a Mars and Capricorn could even appreciate a Mars and Aries. It'll clash, but they like that power. Same as Mars, even though Mars and Libra may be passive aggressive sometimes with Mars and Cancer, they can appreciate the power in that energy. But seeing power mastered is the sexiest thing to a Mars and to a Capricorn, but especially in Mars and Capricorn. Mars in Aquarius, the weirdest Mars position ever in life. Mars in Aquarius is that one Mars position that could be totally okay with like having virtual reality sex. Or you ever see those people who have like robot sex dolls who or like those like sex toys, which don't get me wrong, Mars and Taurus loves their sex toys. You hook a Mars and Taurus up with a vibrator and use it on them, oh my goodness. But Mars and Aquarius, you're gonna see them have like a sex robot. Don't even play with Mars and Aquarius. Like if you're in a relationship with them and you try and like play sexual games with them, Mars and Aquarius will just be like, oh really, you want to sexually manipulate me? Bet. I'm gonna get a flashlight, or I'm gonna get this like robot sex toy that has a strap on and can do me, and it's a wrap. Like they will fight. They will fight it out, and they will win that fight. They'll be using their sex toys in front of you, like, yeah, I wish you could do. You wish you could do this for real, and before you know it, you give in to them. Like Mars and Aquarius has one of the strongest wills when it comes to desire, and a lot of this is because of the way they can detach their need for whatever they desire. So once again, it's just not that deep. What adds to this is their unconventional nature for sex. So in an extreme case, Mars in an Aquarius can actually be very freaky to where they like to have sex with multiple people, or they prefer. What Mars and Aquarius can do really well is to have threesomes with people or have sex with friends, similar to Mars in the 11th. They know how to relate with people on that personal level. So people who would be not as open to doing weird or quirky things in sex, a Mars and Aquarius can definitely make that happen. That's the one cool thing about their sexual magnetism. They make the act cool. They add certain advanced techniques as well in ways you would never expect, which is what make them unpredictable. And I would say Mars in Aquarius is one of the only other strategic Mars that can compete with Scorpio just because of how strategic they can be. Whereas with Mars and Scorpio, it's more of a strategic element to how they act. Mars and Aquarius is more personal knowledge of you and how they study the patterns of your behavior. Although Mars and Aquarius could be a lot of know-it-alls too, just because of how they take action based on, once again, what they sense intuitively on a fast mental level. To appeal to Mars and Aquarius is similar to Mars in Libra, where first of all, you have to cover the bases of mental stimulation. It, and at least being unique. A Mars in Aquarius is detached enough to where it won't really discriminate and the desire could be expressed for all things. But if you're very unique and hard to crack, it'll inquire more curiosity for this Mars in Aquarius to know. Similar to the difference between Mars and Aries and Mars and Aquarius is Mars and Aries can just lose interest like that. Mars and Aquarius, once they figure you out and know, then they lose interest because it's not a mystery anymore. But your willingness and ability to introduce them to cool social circles or cool things evokes greater desire too. And then finally, we have Mars in Pisces, the most fish-tarded Pisces, or the most fish-tarded Mars ever. And I say fish-tarded because Mars and Pisces literally do nothing and expect everything. It's amazing. They think that they can just spend time in imagination and what they do in the dream realm will actually happen in the real world. Well, guess what, Mars and Pisces? That's actually true. I didn't realize this until recently. And yes, as you can guess, I'm hella jealous. This is one of those Mars positions that is pretty difficult because you have Mars that primarily is always wanting to evoke desire. But in Pisces, it literally cessates the ability to do that. So a Mars in Pisces will literally do everything. That's the one cool thing about Mars and Pisces. The pro to Mars and Pisces is it can do anything. It could literally do anything that you can think of in the most detailed and fleshed out way. The bad news is it only does it in its imagination. The Mars and Pisces will do everything except do actually what they've spent the whole time imagining that they were going to do in the first place. And this is what definitely makes it easy to connect with the Mars and Pisces, because all you kind of have to do is just do something and they'll adapt to you. And just like Chad Taylor said, doing nothing is a lifestyle. It's funny how things come to you that way. And Mars in Pisces has mastered that. Whereas Mars in Aries is very forceful and directive, Mars in Pisces is very passive, and they know how to go with the flow, which allows them not to miss opportunities they would if they might have had it. All right. So don't get it twisted, because the thing with sex magic is it could either be a dud or it could be great. Mars and Pisces can evoke to your fantasies and your imaginations. And once they get an idea of how you are, and that's one cool thing about Mars and Pisces and the Mars and water signs, they can intuitively attune to your moods, and they know how to express their sexual desire based on how you feel. But this is one of the more imaginative, delusional energies, and you have to be creative. If you can't appeal to their sense of imagination, it'll be hard to connect with them. But at the same time, they're passive enough to where if you're forceful with them, they'll just go down with it. Mars and Pisces can although get abused in this way too, to where they're getting molested or people are doing stuff and they don't want to, but they don't say anything. This is that one Mars position. Even Mars in Virgo could be passive like this too. And sometimes Mars in Gemini, where outright forceful people can just decide to do whatever anyway. And they don't really, in rare cases, they'll say something if maybe they have strong Aries or strong Aquarius. Other than that, if you just kind of take a Mars and Pisces by the hand, they will just go with the flow. And then Stockholm syndrome their way into liking it. So keep that in mind. Because of the wishy-washy nature of this energy, sometimes they don't even know if they truly want it or not. This is why they won't speak up. So keep that in mind. Um, just like Ethernosis said, being indecisive makes it easier to take advantage. And predators will easily see this because they could be so focused on creating the magic. But Mars in Pisces is a very dynamic sexual position when they're very much so comfortable and open up to you. They're some of the most genius imaginative minds, and they can give you a sexual experience that you may have never expected them to. Or sometimes they can just be so in their imagination, they just had sex in their head and their imagination. That's one thing about Mars in Aquarius and Pisces. They could be more excited about the imagination and thought of sex than the actual act of sex itself. So we're going to take a 5-minute break, and then we'll go through Mars in the zodiac houses. Thank you once again. We're going to end this webinar here. No, I'm just joking. How have you enjoyed this webinar so far? Has this been informative? For those of you in the live chat, how do you feel your understanding of Mars has been so far? And we will resume once again in 5 minutes. Thank you very much for your patience, guys. Once again, please give me like another 5 minutes and we will resume. Gonna take another short break. All right, let us now resume. Thank you very much for your patience. We will now move forward, as is the nature of Mars, the forward moving, when it's in cardinal signs, with Mars's influence in the houses. As such, I will interpret Mars's energy in a natal sense, but also taking into account what Mars's influence does in transits through the first and in synastry. As we start with Mars's transit through the first house, Mars in the first is going to make one an instrument of desire as they archetypalize and personalize this Martian energy. Their desire is freely accessible, and it's going to indicate one who wears their passion on their sleeve. The person with Mars on their in their first house is sexually attractive, and not really because of the aesthetic, although that could add a lot to it. But once again, that Martian energy is very personal. It's going to exude directly from who they are. It's similar to Mercury in the first, where what you'll notice about them is how accessible the way they think and communicate is. Mars, a lot of their passion is going to once again exude from their personality, making them a bit forceful in some cases and definitely confrontational when they want to be. It's a different kind of it's definitely going to entail an important sense and element of once again how one embraces this Martian energy directly, especially during a transit, which personalizes a lot of this aggression. And because of this energy, it could make one come across as more aggressive than they may be if they're unaware of how forceful this is, especially in cardinal signs. A large part of what this person desires will have much to do with, once again, themselves. These people know how to act very directly towards who they are, and they achieve a lot of their personal goals. When Mars is transiting the first, as Diane has mentioned, this is what's going to make one very productive. Although this will do more with gaining a personal element of what motivates you. And this is actually seen very personally um, in synastry. If someone's Mars is on your first house, especially smack dab on the AC, you are the definition of sexual attraction to them. And just by you, just by you like being there, they're going to be sexually turned on by you. I've personally experienced this with some Aries risings where they're just generally hot. Like it's an Aries, it flares it up. But for the woman, her Mars is going to indicate an even more powerful sexual attraction, as Mars is the lover, usually. So when someone's Mars is in your first house, they could be very confrontational with you and very direct in the way they, if you're a Scorpio rising or a Taurus rising and their Mars is on your AC, this person's going to they're going to touch you a lot. They're going to be very direct. They may even abuse you in some cases. It's very on personal to who you are. But once again, it's going to indicate very direct energy. So it can be very easy to dislike or come into conflicts. But ultimately, what they'll desire the most about you is your personality. Once we get into Mars in the second house, Mars in the second house is a passionate manifester. And the value, this gives them stubborn values because Mars in the second house is going to fight for what they value, as well as in a position where they're given extra ability to express themselves. It will kind of speak to a more aggressive element to the way one not only manifests but builds things in their life. There's also a crazy element of how much sexual confidence the Mars in the second house exudes. At its best, at its worst, Mars in the second house can beat themselves up about how much lack of confidence they have. But ultimately, this builds up to a great sense of confidence within themselves that they sexually display. And a lot of this desire will have much to do with possessions, tangible or intangible, and what they can have. It has much to do with a subtle influence over how they gain over others in some less than honorable cases, but it's not always in a bad way. When Mars is transiting your second house, it may actually cause arguments over ownership in some extreme cases, but it's going to really bring into account what values you're really passionate about defending before it goes into the third house and you actually like start arguing. You may start to develop changes in what you desire and the tastes that determine what you desire. But what this will more or less indicate during a transit is the ability to take action on what you want to manifest. While you develop, once again, more assertiveness in your self-esteem. When someone's Mars is in your second house, or vice versa, what they desire most about you is what you have and your values and your level of confidence. It's actually kind of interesting because this is one of those rare Mars positions that will indicate someone that likes to build and manifest with you. So, as such, you may find that they give you ample motivation to think more highly of yourself or to raise your confidence, or they can attack that. It's either or. I mean, it's not that black and white, but the thing with Mars is anything that could be potentially sexually liberating could equally or even more be confrontational, because Mars is the energy that's going to now take things very forcefully. But Mars and Earth houses have much to do with ambition and desiring to create because they see the potential in that person. Mars in the third house is highly opinionated because they get very passionate and aggressive about their ideas. And not just that, this is actually a very fun Mars position because it's also going to add a powerful element of desire to learning new skills. Where Mercury in the third is going to be very into the analytical and informative nature of what's being learned, Mars wants to accomplish the skill. Mars wants to learn the skill so it can be the very best. Well, I mean, that would be more Mars and Saturn. No one ever was. If it's like in a sign like Capricorn, if it's in Aries, it'll just, learn a skill and then get over it. But once again, like with Mars in the third house, one can develop a lustful attitude towards life that doesn't really allow them to see things clearly sometimes. Because a lot of their bias could be influenced by the level of anger or passion they feel versus a Jupiter in a third that is just eternally optimistic. Although their attitude is lustful, it is also motivational. But if you see someone with Mars in a third house, know they have a particular set of sexual skills that they have learned over the course of several years. And if you don't have sex with them, they will use those particular set of sexual skills. They will find you and they will have sex with you. When Mars transits the third house, it's really hard not to get in arguments because the transference of ideas now gets passionate and you could almost fight for certain ideas to be heard. When someone has Mars in the third, they will fight for what they said to be heard. They won't be overlooked, even if it has to be in a passive aggressive way. Mars gets it in. And during transits, you may find that you, especially if Mercury's involved, you're having to be more assertive with the way you express your message. But once again, this will also talk about being more direct and aggressive in the way you communicate and telegraph your sexual intent. And when someone's Mars is in your third, they're very sexually attracted to talking to you, even if it's at a subconscious level, where before they know, it's not in a mercurial way, where it's like the way you talk or the way you say things is attractive to them, but more so your attitude and the way your mind works is very attractive. And they desire very much so your skills and how you put together who you are and what you have. As such, though, people with Mars in your third house may get into arguments with you just really purely to see how your mind works. These are the kind of people who could act like they're mad at you, but they just have fun arguing with you because of that aggressive element. Or we'll speak to motivation once again. in being able to engage like this. Because remember, it won't always manifest in communication if it's not in air signs. This is really just more so how intent is telegraphed and what the message is. But still, nonetheless, it's a very integral Mars position actually, because it could shift the perception. People with Mars in the third could be very influential, even if they don't know most of what they're saying, just because they're aggressive with the way they uh, push what they say. Mars in the fourth, believe it or not, is one of the most suppressed sexual energies, unless there's constant sex that's personal and private. Oh, like Margaret said, for Mars in the third, seduction through writing is another key feature for Mars in the third. Mars in the fourth house, however, you're going to really see, once again, very suppressed sexual energy, because the very nature of how Mars wants to act is very privately, behind closed doors. And this isn't so much so that a Mars in the fourth can't do anything in public, but they're going to have private aims and ambitions for why they're doing what they're doing, especially also keeping in mind and incorporating from fourth from the first. It's not fully the seventh house, but they may kind of bind their actions based to what their home base wants. This is that Mars position that may not do certain things because it may not really align with their family's desires, versus a Mars in the first that will solely be care about what they want out of it. But once again, because Mars is stuck at home, it's very suppressed. Like a Mars in the fourth house, when they go out, they're probably going to bring someone home before they unleash. And the private nature isn't always due to any shyness or inhibition, as much as it has much to do with the element of personal depth. Even the sexual energy expressed with Mars in the fourth house is not only so much private as much as it illustrates a level of, soul. It's unconventional. It's not to say Mars in the fourth can't be promiscuous, but you kind of have to know them on a personal level, especially to evoke that desire. But a lot of it has to do with this private level of how they express their desire, so that they will only feel they'll only reveal the intent if they're comfortable with you. And when Mars transit the fourth house, you there this is usually going to bring with it some private issues that have to be dealt behind closed doors, as you kind of, deal with certain home issues. You don't want to, in this case, equate the fourth house to home and family with Mars, because as a personal, that would be more with like Saturn or Jupiter. Because as a personal planet, this is really more going to be how you take action, versus the 10th house opposite, which is a lot more public and, having to deal with one's vocation. But you want to be mindful of how your behavior is beginning to be influenced by the things that you only choose to do when you're alone. It's very similar to Mars in the 12th, just a lot deeper and less delusional. When someone's Mars is in your fourth, You may find that the actions they take with you are just personal to you. A Mars in the fourth and it's not even like intentionally they think about this, like, oh, my Mars is in their fourth, so I'm just gonna not do stuff. But they may not take action with you out in public. They may not take you out to go to an amusement park. They may take you to maybe their home. They may feel very comfortable as well. Someone with Mars in your fourth house, they feel very comfortable um acting. There may be an initial sense of suppression, but there's going to be a very personal level to where the way they take action reflects how they know your soul. You'll see this repeated again in the eighth, just at a deeper level. Mars in the fifth house is someone with very profound sexual talents. And similar to Mars and Leo, they like they're all about performing their desire, and they definitely could be, you know what I mean, porn stars as well. And this has much to do though with the demonstrative expression of Mars that allows for one to fully express their skills after they delve up how to feel about any private issues, adding depth to one's personality. Mars here not only adds a sexual element to how they express their talents, but it makes one very charismatic, seductive, and attractive. Attractive. It's a very, very talented position because even if there's not as much expertise, the passion is felt with the heart that will extend it forth in order to eventually become skilled in the talent. But people with Mars in the fifth are very fun to have sex with. Very fun to have sex with because the act of expressing their desire is fun for them. And you can feel that fun in their passion. When Mars transits the fifth house, this not only brings with it sexual opportunities to play Tetris, if you know what I mean. That was a horrible analogy. I just made that up on the spot. But it definitely expresses a lot of drive in one's ability to develop one's talents assertively and aggressively. In fact, especially if you're wanting to date or in around this period, you can gain a lot by assertively expressing your sexual intent, but putting heart into it. And when someone's Mars is in your fifth house, they derive a lot of desire and pleasure in the sexual act of engaging with you or just having fun with you. Even if your Mars is in their fifth house, the way you're going to act will be in ways that are fun to and for them. But this is one of those positions that takes away the inhibition that, once again, sex can bring and really adds an enjoyment to this, to where naturally you're wanting to open up instead of be restrictive. Mars in the sixth house is going to indicate one who has perfected their sexual desire and develops a passionate behavior through the implementation of a sexual routine. And I really do mean a sexual routine to where, similar to a Mars in Capricorn or Venus in Capricorn, Mars in the sixth house can account for every portion of their day when they'll even have sex, where it could be just free flow. A lot of their passionate expression will be accounted to their lifestyle. A Mars in the sixth house may even detail when and how they'll engage in the act. But in some cases, it's not as analytical as such. It'll just really speak to the way a lot of this aggression is applied strategically. Mars as well in one sixth house gives one a sexual style that's is unique to their behavior, but sometimes it could, if Mars isn't controlled, make one addicted to sex. Mars in the sixth and Mars in the eighth house. People would think Mars in the eighth house can make one addicted to sex because of a deep craving. But actually, Mars in the sixth, if it's too much a part of the behavior, because of the influential nature of it, could make one, easily addicted, where it influences their behavior. But the mutable nature of this still allows for adaptability. And when Mars transits the sixth house, you start to perfect and integrate your ability to express your own passionate desire through your lifestyle. It's actually more subtle than you would think, but you start to really fine tune and perfect more or less how you deal with anger in your behavior. At its worst, Mars in a six can make one very angry and easily irritable, but at its best, it can make someone effortlessly motivational and passionate, or effortlessly motivated and passionate and motivational, just because their behavior is very assertive and pumped with everything that they do. When someone's Mars is in your sixth house, they'll actually be assertive in the way they do things with you. Although they could be critical about your actions and could be critical about what you do and how you do it. But it will also account to really desiring your lifestyle. In some odd cases, if someone has their Mars in your sixth house, they could actually desire to take over your life, like to work for you, where there's an aggressive nature to, in the case of Mars in the second, um, really take over certain duties of the work environment or managing such. With Mars in the seventh house, Mars in the seventh house is similar to Mars in the sixth house, a science of seduction, where also similar to Mars and Libra, you're confrontational in a different way. There's a directness to how one will express their desire towards someone, but it has much again to do with the behavior of that other person and what may inhibit or stop one from, or inspire one from acting in a certain way. In other words, whereas the Mars in the first house will take actions and desire things based off of their own tastes and what they personally think and like, Mars in the seventh house is going to desire things based on what they either want for the other person or what the other person uh, desires. Well, let me change that. It's not like Mars in Libra, where to be what the other person desires. It's really going to be more so what they desire in the context of that partnership and what they're desiring to compromise with. But once again, it could bring a lot more drama because similar to Mars in the third, it's going to attract aggressive and Martian people in one's life that kind of that are very much so assertive towards them. And this may be exciting in some cases, but it could also be abusive in others. As such, Mars in the seventh is the co-conspirator who will instigate in some cases, but also partner with this energy. I almost see Mars in seventh as holding space, so they allow others to harness that energy that they naturally have. They are the sex conductors in a sense where, based on how they have studied your personality, they know how to take action. Once again, very similar to a nurturing influence, but just more in a complementary, balancing way. When Mars transits your seventh house, believe it or not, this is actually what triggers relationships to begin. You may look to Venus to kind of bring in a relationship, but you'd actually be better off looking at Juno because it's Mars that will start to have people take action towards you. Where when Venus is in transiting your seventh, so you may be more pleasing, but Mars is what's going to actually dynamically bring this into focus. And you as well may find that the level of how directly you deal with others really completes your initial expression. But it could also really bring fights while Mars is in your seventh, where people openly come to combat you. When someone's Mars is in your seventh, this could bring um, a veritable amount of desire ranging from normal to extreme. However, this does also bring with it a powerful element of confrontation and opposition. Someone's Mars in your seventh will project their desire towards doing things with you, but more so in a way that illustrates the potential for excitement and what they desire about you most is the way you complement them and the way you balance out their desires. But that doesn't always work in every case. As such, this is what will determine whether it's complementing or confrontational. Mars in the eighth house now delves more into the psychology of seduction. And it really speaks of developing a strategic way of dealing with other people. Mars in the eighth house is not really as sexual as people hype it up to be because it does, people kind of mistake it for Mars in Scorpio, which is more about the purity of the energy. Mars in the eighth house is actually very assertive and aggressive in the way they deal with other people's resources. Actually, people who have Mars in the eighth house are really good at getting other people's money, only because the way they're also able to express their actions indicates the psychological level of intimacy they once again can assertively maintain. Some people who they're able to do it very sexually and subtly. In some cases, this will manifest itself in extreme desire, but once again, it really will speak to a seductive, persuasive element that directly expresses itself in the way they not only manage other people's desires but deal with other people based on what they have or can take. Mars in the eighth house is the one that's going to hold you up at gunpoint and say, give me what you got. Or they wouldn't even have to hold you up at gunpoint. They'll just walk up to you and they'll just kind of like take what you have, and people will be okay with it. I'm like, okay. It's not going to ask. It's not going to be like, hey, can I have that pizza in the fridge? They're just going to kind of go and take it because in the eighth house, they can sense how well you trust them. And when, and they have, because their senses are so in tune and desire, they have superstitious suspicions that aren't really always superstitious, but the Mars in the eighth house is the one that might get a little paranoid or just know that someone might be hearing them or talking about them, or they don't, or they might not be liked, especially if Pluto's involved, because they have an idea of sensing negative intent, but they also have great spidey senses as well due to the level of intimacy gained through trust. When Mars is transiting through the eighth house, it can make one very irritable and sensitive if they have trust issues to where they lash out at people they don't trust. But it can also increase the level of depth if there's trust. This is what now gives Mars in the eighth that super sexual reputation. That only comes if there's trust, where now they feel a lot more capable to express more. And during a transit, you may find you have to deal with people who step into your boundaries and take action. This can make this confrontational too, as it's next to the seventh, especially if someone's Mars is in your eighth house. There's a very sexual element to this, not even because of anything overbearingly passionate, but a very psychological level of how someone whose Mars is in your eighth will just cross your boundaries in a very sexual way. To where if there's trust, it's like they can break your rules and it's sexy to you. The Mars in the eighth will evoke a primal, that person's Mars will evoke a primal reaction from you, especially because of the desire that they feel or evoke in this subtle way that once again will give the Mars person a feeling of power in the sense of how they cross your boundaries once again and take action in a more intimate sense, ranging anywhere from taking your cookies to just grabbing your hand. Whereas a Mars in another house may not be able to get away with just doing that. Mars in the eighth house will. Go figure. When Mars is in the ninth house, this, of course, actually gives one a super high sex drive, even if it's not in a fire sign. The super high sex drive is facilitated by the adventurous wanderlust that opens one's desire up to so many possibilities. And it really openly comes into a much greater element and level to how one places high expectations or have high vision in what they want to accomplish or what they desire. As you would think, Mars in the ninth house is very adventurous and they want a full on experience in the expression of their desire. But similar to the third house, it also really evokes a passionate sense of confrontation when it comes to debates and arguing. Whereas Mars in the third house will argue with you over whether what you read in a newspaper article was correct or not, and whether the current events of the week you agree with passionately or not. Mars in the ninth house is going to talk about whether they believe in the flat earth theory. You know, if someone has Mars in the third house or your Mars is in their third, you may argue with them over whether you think Kim Kardashian is like the coolest chick ever or not. But if it's Mars in the ninth, you're going to argue about whether hedonism is ruining our society and culture. And people with Mars in the ninth can get way too zealous and passionate about their beliefs because they really this is what fuels their action and desire. And the sex they have, believe it or not, they really want to be meaningful. And it doesn't have to be an emotional way. They'll just always find a way to add meaning into whatever they do. When Mars transits your ninth house now, this is going to reflect itself very powerfully in how the development of your ideas is expressed forth through how you act on them, as well as how you also develop your beliefs. It will make you very passionate about things you learn and teach as well. A Mars in the ninth house is going to be that sexual teacher if Jupiter is involved too, but they'll, in some cases, teach by showing. And when someone's Mars is in your ninth house, what they desire most about you is your philosophy and the way you live your life. Similar in a sixth house way, but the beliefs that really determine where you direct your life that you live. You may find that the more you harness your willingness to adventure forward, the more that person's Mars aids you to and pushes you forward to gain motivation through such themes. Once we now look at Mars in the 10th house, this gives ambitious desire. And like Mars in the ninth, Mars in the 10th is also a larger than life energy that indicates a very powerful element and level of tenacity and strength, but expresses itself in the desire to attain goals and achieve goals. Mars in the 10th is similar to Mars in the 5th, where they both want acknowledgement. Mars in the 5th wants acknowledgement for their talents. Mars in the 10th wants acknowledgement and demands respect for what they've done and their mark in the world. And this is also going to express itself in the way that they display public power plays, where Mars in the 10th can get off over being more powerful than others. Public power plays show that these people see an opportunity in taking action out in public, because these are the ones that are going to be assertive towards going to that guru or going to someone at the top of their field or an authority figure. Although Mars in the 10th could bring lots of fights with one's father or with the law, because you don't necessarily have a passive relationship with such, and people who kind of assert themselves over you, you're going to be more militant towards. When Mars transits the 10th, this actually does really well for your ability to actually allow yourself to achieve career goals and really motivate yourself to set those. It's actually really great for motivation. And most importantly, taking action off of things that you want to accomplish. It could also bring gossip if it makes negative aspects, as we'll talk on soon. But once again, it's going to illustrate more the ability to really come into a more passionate level of how you publicly display not your affection, but your desire. Similar to Mars in the 11th, they wouldn't necessarily mind sex in public, but it would have to be for an agenda or reason rather than just to be different. When someone's Mars is in your 10th house, what they desire most about you is your reputation. A Mars in the 10th house will fight someone for their reputation. So if you have a good reputation, they may desire that, and they may motivate you too, even if you don't, to work more on your public image. It's actually kind of interesting too, because you'll find that a Mars in your 10th house motivates and pushes you to do things that you may be too in your comfort zone to do as well. Mars in the 11th house is going to indicate the classic friends with benefits energy. It also indicates a passionate leader, as the 11th house is how your 5th house influences other people. So when you have Mars in the 11th house, you have the ability to get other people, like an audience, amped and very much so empowered. Also, you can gain desire or confrontation. People with Mars in the 11th house can either get jumped or jump others. They can roll with a crew and fight as a group. A Mars in the 11th house, in some cases, will be able to, a Mars in the 11th in Aquarius will be able to get like 100 people to stomp you out. And they fight more with numbers and the quality of those numbers. Whereas Mars in the 11th in Aries, they probably could fight 100 people at once, kung fu style. It really speaks to engaging with others in this sense. But because Mars is also in the 11th, there's a very detached way to where they it's easy for them to have sex with their friends. And they don't necessarily attach sex with emotions. So having sex with their friends isn't something they're going to attach strings to. They can still be friends with people that they've had sex with and not let it get in the way of the relationship. Mars in the 11th house could also, similar to Mars in the 9th, engage in an alternative sex life that includes, once again, like three ways or different ways of having sex, like Mars in the 12th. That's more imaginative and in some cases non-existent. When Mars transits your 11th house, you'll find that there's a lot of sexual energy with, once again, friends. You may find friends hit on you when Mars transits your 11th. Or there's a lot of passionate opportunity to really be motivated by a group. Or you may find, groups go to war with or against you. Regardless, what you'll also find is great motivation and desire inspired by your network of people. But when someone's Mars is in your 11th house, once again, there's going to be a desire to connect with you on a much cooler level where there's almost a karmic connection of sorts. But a lot of what this person desires is your network of friends. Someone who has their Mars in your 11th could even in some cases desire your friends. Not even sexually, although in some cases, yes. But really would look into how you're able to connect with others and the places you take them or connect with them. Someone's Mars in your 11th house is also going to inspire you and push you to not be a hermit and to get to network with other people. Finally, Mars in the 12th house does, as you would think, speak to spiritual sex, where in some cases, Mars actually becomes a superpower. And the level of action taken is taken in a sense that incorporates the divine element of what's ultimately occurring. As such, it can feel a lot like, to the Mars in the 12th, they're in a separate realm. If anything, there is a lot of spiritual realm activity to where the Mars in the 11th doesn't really feel like or desire to do anything because that 12th house assates the desire. But it's not that it doesn't desire to do anything. Its level of action is on in another dimension, and it's accessed through imagination. This is important now because with the greater awareness of entities and ghosts and spirits, people with Mars in the 12th house do battle with these entities. It's really great for exorcisms and also for combating subconscious energies. Although with Mars in the 11th, this could be a place of undoing where their suppressed anger and temper does not necessarily allow them to get the things they want in life, as their first reaction towards a conflict may not even be anger, but compassion. Similar in the case of Mars and Pisces. But once again, the spiritual sex will indicate unorthodox or very strange methods of having sex, especially sexorcisms, which Diane Nolan had spoken on, which is very powerful, where certain negative entities could be exercised through the act of sex on the part of the Mars in the 12th house. And the transcendent desire teaches them the lesson of extremely purifying their intent to where they have to suspend their desires. So it's not only timed well, but it really speaks more to what it is they have the potential to truly be led to. But it is still a frustrating place for Mars. It's not always the best position. Especially in the way that Mars could desire a lot of vices that get in the way of the person, doing what will be productive to them. But once again, once mastered, Mars does become a superpower in the way that you'll see Tai Chi experts or Kung Fu masters effortlessly move their body, where they're so in the flow, like Mars and Pisces. And it's not like boxing where they directly express themselves, but it very much so takes into advantage the movement and flow of energy. When Mars transits the 12th house, it's going to indicate a profound exploration into a lot of one's subconscious. You may find during this period it's easy to be lethargic, and there's a lot of escapism that's being done. And this is because Mars now starts to take action in the other realm. And the time that you're spending asleep or lethargic, you're spending in other parallel realms like your imagination or your dreams, fighting entities, working through subconscious dream patterns and lessons, so that once Mars comes back into the first, you're ready to take action based on what you reviewed. But it's even deeper than that. And as we kind of unlock more of the 12th, people will start to step into the more supernatural element of this Mars, which can range anywhere from telekinesis to teleportation as you take action in divine ways. And similar to the 4th and 8th house, these people are very private with their actions, and they can do things when you least expect them. And whatever they say they're going to do is very different from what they truly desire, which is something that they keep private only to themselves. When someone's Mars is in your 12th house, this is going to indicate the ability for one to kind of be more inhibited by their presence, especially if your Mars is in their 12th house. The person's Mars will actually feel a lot more comfortable expressing things because of the very private and unconscious way that the 12th house influences the Mars individual. And when they take actions with you, it'll be, once again, very private, something that's behind closed doors. This is also the house of the 12th house, is also the house of you know, sex, but more being in the bed all day having sex. So it's going to really indicate a form of lazy lust and love in some senses. It doesn't always have to be lazy though. Now, when we get to the aspects, hidden bed pleasures, there we go. When we get to the aspects, Saturn, not Saturn, Mars and Aries, oh my God, Mars and the Sun is going to indicate. Oh, I need to interrupt myself. Ether Gnosis said, I think I have a secret Reiki relationship with the Mars in my 12th. Yes, Reiki relationships are classic in the 12th because the awareness of being able to share energetic energy is amplified in the 12th. To take advantage of non-local distance, healing, or projected intent. When the sun and Mars aspect each other, it gives one an awareness of their power, especially when it's conjunct in the chart. It's very powerful. It's not only very powerful, it gives one power over their energy. You'll find these people evoke such strong sexual charisma. Even in the case in the trine, the sextile will now complement a lot of very complementary energies, but one key feature to the Sun and Mars speaks to the amplification of one's awareness to the way they're able to, once again, express their desire and what they desire. This now heavily clashes in the case of the square and even the quincunx in opposition, to where what one desires may not really align with how they see things. As such, one can limit or get in the way of how one acts. And this is not always a bad thing. In the case of the opposition, there will be a clash, but this can bring one into completion because what one is aware of, Mars can now act in the opposite way to bring the best of both worlds. But in the case of the square, it will be limiting. In some ways, that can actually bring out more power if the balance is met. In the case of synastry, Mars on the sun will indicate sexual attraction. Sexual attraction will be very powerful in terms of the Mars square sun, but that initial attraction will be met with a lot of friction on part of the Mars because the way the Mars person takes action will clash with the square to the sun, in the sense where the first quarter square has to submit to the sun, and the third quarter square could actually gain reciprocal submission from the sun to the Mars. In the case of the conjunction and sextile or trine, this will indicate very vibrant sexual compatibility and chemistry, to where just the sun person being there amplifies a lot of desire and feeds it. The Mars person will be very turned on by the sun person, but it will also speak to a direct confrontation in certain cases. Oh, nice. The moon will indicate receptivity to power. This is one of the classic yin yang connections, actually, to where in some cases, in for male and females, the woman's moon will really feel receptive to having the Mars conjunction baby in synastry. But before we get to synastry, Mars and the moon will indicate how receptive you are to power and also how you emotionally express your desire so that not only do you desire what you're ambitious about, but you really do feel this. And it, in some cases, can make someone very emotional when they are angry. But in the case of the trine and sextile, they're able to balance in a way that helps one emotionally understand their desired impulses. In the case of the square, this could be very difficult because what one desires clashes with how they feel about it. And in some cases, both the moon and the Mars can desire the same thing, but the way that they go about the Mars person, the way the Mars goes about it will be uncomfortable for the moon. Once again, if you look to a first quarter square, the Mars usually will have to take preference to the moon, but in the third quarter square, the Mars is actually going to gain more from being assertive. You just can't be too assertive, as it really will clash, and the opposition will indicate a level of really being in a position to come to completion, but that can be difficult in some cases if there's an imbalance. Of course, what I forgot to mention actually is that when the sun transits Mars, or rather when Mars transits the sun in your chart, this will indicate areas that harness how you are generally aware of what you're taking action on, which is what makes Mars transits to the sun very passionate. Even during oppositions where you complete that passion, squares will indicate challenges that really make you see more the effect of your actions and what needs to be changed and perfected. Whereas trines will bring out your talents, and even quincunx bring about subtle transformations as you perfect or change certain things. This same dynamic is seen here, but with feelings. And you want to look to Mars transits to your moon to indicate emotional triggers, especially in the case of squares. Oppositions aren't necessarily as bad, but conjunctions can really bring about moody transits. And in synastry, someone's moon on your Mars will indicate how receptive they are to your desire. This can indicate a very deep sexual link. Even if it's the woman's Mars and the man's moon, the moon person is not only going to be very receptive to that aggressive desire, in some cases, it may crave it. And the Mars will really desire how easy it is and how effortless the moon really takes that in. So in cases of the square, this could be very tough because the moon is not going to react, is going to react very sensitively to Mars's clashes, even if the intent is pure. This is where moon sextiles or trines to Mars and synastry really do help in the way that it relays emotional understanding, and the Mars will take action based off on how the moon feels. Communication power is very, very important as well, because if your Mars and Mercury are positively aspected in your chart, it will really indicate one who is very skilled at telegraphing their intent, especially sexually. The awkwardly aspecting Mars and Mercury's could create awkward moments because if you don't if the way you think clashes with the way you act, then it could be hard to communicate in some ways how you kind of do certain things. where you may act faster than you communicate. So, as opposed to if your Mars trines your Mercury, an example. So, as you're doing something, you know how to communicate what you're doing. This could be very difficult in a square or a semi sextile, where as you're doing something, you're having to adapt to the way you cognitively process it. Although, in the case of the conjunction, this will make someone very passionate in the way they communicate, but also very influential. And in some cases, sexual in the way they think. But the Mars Mercury conjunction is less about sex and more about the assertive nature to how they possess, use, and really act off on their skills. So when we now look at transits from Mercury to Mars, this is also going to be an indicator of, you know, arguments that trigger, actions that have to be taken based off of news relayed. This will be more so on Mercury transits, but Mars transits to your Mercury personally will indicate how arguments or changes to your mind have to be made through actions, and really keys into the behavioral development of one's mind through the refinement of your desire. When we get into synastry, someone's Mars on your Mercury will make them very passionate about the way you think. In fact, this is one of those rare links that can make the way you communicate very sexy to the Mars person, especially if it's an exact conjunction. However, this will almost assuredly bring with it arguments constantly, to where the Mars person is always pushing the Mercury person to think in more passionate ways, or to just probe that Mercury person's mind. Even in the case of the opposition, once again, though, with positive aspects, the way the Mercury person thinks and communicates will be very sexy to the Mars person because of the expression of their skills. But in the case of the square or the quincunx or the opposition, this can indicate mild challenge. Whereas the trine will allow one to communicate with the way one acts in both cases, the square could cause a lot of arguments once again. It doesn't necessarily allow for it could rub the Mars person off the wrong way too, when neither person meant any ill intent or harm. Boo, 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 boo. Other such outer planets and influence with Mars will indicate Jupiter with passionate expansion. Should believe it or not, Jupiter and Mars definitely brings with it an important sense of passion, but conviction. Now, conviction isn't really the right way, but really more so contagious passion. Mars and Jupiter can get you to believe something because of how passionate they express their beliefs. But the philosophical debate will come through with ill aspects in synastry or through transits. But once again, especially in the case of the conjunction, Mars and Jupiter not only pushes forward, but it pushes forward uh very, very largely. And it could also make one very sexual. Even in the case of the square, it's just in the case of the square, one can do way too much, way too powerfully, if there's no restraint. Or kind of have too much. depending on the state. Quantum action or karmic action comes with Saturn and Mars, where Saturn and Mars indicate a more restrictive element of this action, especially in the case of the square, where Saturn now becomes a leash and a source of conflict for actions that inhibit Mars' capacity to fully execute. But of course, in all cases, this is just meant to align more one's desire and actions with maturity and in ways that align with their karma and contribution towards society. Quantum desire now is going to be met with Uranus, and Uranus and Mars have an odd relationship that sometimes can unpredictably really lead to death. You want to look at Mars Uranus transits in synastry and personally to really, indicate more so or less what will cause one to kind of make certain unpredictable actions. This could be difficult in the square where even sex comes very unpredictably versus the sextile and trine that is able to add this advanced element and supplement one's action to do things in ways that are not only unique but very genius, very genius. The challenge in the case of the opposition would be to bring this to full completion using compromising two sides into harmony. And divine motivation is Neptune, the god of escapism, which Mars Neptune people, drugs. The way they may escape could be unhealthy in squares or opposition, but a more mature way of doing this that's well maybe in the trine or sextile. Mars and Neptune will add a very mystical element to how one takes action as well, that very much so attunes their intuition. But in the case of the square, it could be difficult to trust that intuition. And sometimes they may take action that clashes with what they sense. Advanced sexual techniques now include a tantric sex activation. Mars and Venus will be looked more into part 3, where we'll really look into different scenarios of how Mars and Venus express themselves. But if you have a double whammy, or if you have any important aspects between Mars and someone's Neptune, then you can do this sex activation, even if it's a square opposition. And this tantric sex activation is during a series of sexual encounters with a partner. You test the sensitivity of how intuitively you engage. Neptune, aspecting positively someone's Mars, will have them act based off desire in ways intuitively you don't have to really use words for. And you want to really engage in this activity of desire in some cases without even getting naked, and just seeing how your energy activates. The key here is to test for sensitivity. In the case of Lilith, when Mars is on someone's Lilith, it indicates a very obsessive sexual attraction too, especially on the Lilith's part. They're going to find the Mars person so irresistibly attractive to where they're going to they'll have erotic fantasies of the Mars person, even if Neptune's involved. But with Neptune, and in some cases Pluto, which I forgot to mention, in the outer planets, if we get to nuclear desire, Pluto Mars is going to indicate desire that becomes obsessive, especially if you have Mars opposite or conjunct Pluto. Or in the case of synastry, you could be very obsessed with having sex or having sex with someone or accomplishing something. But it really makes dark one's temper and anger to where it can slip under the radar how someone has already planned your death. This now will allow you to reach deeper levels of sensitivity in how you engage in such practices. Desire compromise party is knowing the language of is knowing someone's Mars sign, basically the language of their desire, and find coming up with 3 ways that you can appease to their Mars. If your Mars is in the same element or fire sign, you'll find it's much easier to compromise. If your Mars is in a different element, you want to come up with 3 ways to that the Mars person likes for you to please their Mars, and then 3 ways that person's Mars can utilize your Mars. This off the bat will, or not utilize your Mars, but fulfill your Mars desire. This will off the bat make up for any clashes in how you both like what you like. And the power generation exercise is really an extension of the desire compromise party, where you're playing in and tuning in the mutual Mars, and you generate power together by, first of all, harnessing your Mars in your way, and then harnessing your Mars in the way the other person's Mars is in. So if you're a Mars in Libra and the other person is a Mars in Sagittarius, then the Mars in Libra will of course play off the Mars in Sagittarius, and then the Mars in Sagittarius will now act like their Mars is in Libra, and the Mars in Libra act like their Mars is in Sag, and then just play off the energy. So the Mars initiation, especially for those of you in the live chat, I want you to now write down your Mars house and sign again, and write more or less your new understanding of Mars, as well as what it is you personally feel your Mars is to you. This initiation will now involve you committing to 3 things that you're going to do to personalize your Mars and how you take action. One can be an action that you take, another could be a sexual technique you employ, and the third could also be a preferred method of fighting. These 3 things you want to commit to, so that every time you take action, you see, of course, how it aligns with what you've committed with those 3. And now I am open for Q&A. Thank you once again for ordering this Mars webinar. I'm now open to taking questions and answers about Mars in your chart or Mars in synastry. Thank you once again for tuning in, and stay tuned for part 3, where we're going to talk about how Mars and Venus connect together so you could enjoy both love and sex. Progressed Mars to natal planets in synastry will trigger events and also activate the power. Mars and Saturn in transits and progressed transits activate energies, especially natal planets. So when Mars is going to go over a natal planet, you want to think to it adding power and adding a lot of fire and passion, even if it's not in a fire sign. Very great question. Even when it crosses over houses, you'll see it take over the that. Thoughts on your Mars and Virgo in the sixth house? Um, Neptune and Jupiter trying to Capricorn. Okay. So it's going to speak of a very proficient ability to not only plan and organize, but take the perfect action. This is very intuitive too. The squares to your sun and moon in Sag, though, will limit you a lot because you're naturally going to want to act uninhibited. Thankfully, since it's a third quarter square, you can trust more your Mars, but you just want to make sure you don't stop yourself from doing things in a more controlled way because it has to be perfect. Sometimes you have to let your Sagittarius just do what it wants and then your Mars and Virgo adapt. Okay. The best way to utilize Mars in the 12th house is so funny because the 12th house is all about not utilizing things. So, especially if it's not in a cardinal sign, you can't utilize it. You actually just kind of have to let it be. This could be very frustrating because the best way to experience Mars in the 12th is spending time in imagination. Mars in the 12th and Mars in Pisces is kind of gangster because this will allow you to focus your desire and to just keep it there until the things you desire come to you and you'll find the right time to take action. But once again, it can be very frustrating because if you're not tapped into that flow, it's not a conventional way of using this. Yes, Ethernosis, you totally do. You totally do. Mars at 29 degrees in any sign, but especially Aries, is super powerful. It's mastered. And with Uranus here, it's definitely going to speak on the nature of your actions being super crazy. If you found yourself a little bit pathological or crazy, you're not crazy. Uranus is literally evolving the nature of how you act, and all of that electric energy could be very much so challenging to harness. And of course, Chiron's influence here will now make this a sexual healing position, but it could add a whole lot of lack of self-esteem or sensitivity to the way one acts, so that the healing process doesn't have to be that intense through the expression of one's masculinity. Mars conjunct Pluto in the composite is going to bring with it a very, very, very shared, intense sexual drive that sometimes can manifest itself in a very deep sense of how you're both willing to take action for better or for worse. It definitely brings love or hate because this will really be more expressed in, once again, how deeply two people are willing to act with harnessing that power in multiple levels of depth and intensity. Very psychological. Yeah, Margaret, it's going to be very difficult because Sagittarius favors the hoe. Sagittarius does not favor the faithful one. Sagittarius makes it very easy to be promiscuous. It's Taurus and Virgo that favor the faithful one, but Sagittarius really wants you to express more that freedom. So it is possible to find it with only one right person, but Sagittarius is going to do that by showing you a lot of people. So it'll give you a lot of choice, and but you can't necessarily, you can't use Sagittarius energy like Taurus. You can't try and be faithful with Taurus. You can be faithful with Sag energy, but you have to go about it in a reflexive way, if that makes sense. But it's totally possible to find that with just one right person. Sometimes Neptune Mars is really dreamy, but usually it brings the finessers and deceivers. And the succubi and incubi. I forgot about that. They really exist. How about Mars Moon conjunction in the seventh in a composite? That's going to align the passionate feelings that both people feel towards expressing towards others. Both of you are going to be very passionate about how you express your mutual feelings, not towards each other, but towards others. It will also speak to irritability that can occur as well if things aren't necessarily on the up and up. But you'll find that this has, once again, a lot to do with how both of you passionately express both of your emotions towards other people and can be receptive to what other people feel about you, so that if it's bad you'll be definitely angry or passionate rather. The nodes transiting Mars. Great question. When the nodes transit Mars, it is, especially if it's, of course, the nodes transiting in natal Mars, it's going to speak of the flow of destiny activating challenges within your sex drive or desire. If it's the North Node, you'll find that you're actually unlocking greater ability to act through really passing some challenges, whereas the South Node transit will actually unlock full mastery. South Node transit of Mars is not bad because it will unlock talents that will be mastered once the North Node is there to once again, achieve the challenge. Ha 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 ha. Wholesome. Spiritual people are blocked sexually traditionally because they're having to break out of old traditional molds, and most spiritual people are usually not in the norm, so it's hard for them to connect with others. If everyone was spiritual, a lot more people will be open sexually. And saying everyone is spiritual is vague because spiritual is so subjective, it can mean anything to anyone. No problemo. Thank you guys for ordering once again this webinar. I'm so very glad you gave some positive feedback. And once again, make sure you stay tuned for part 3, where we go in more the dynamics between love and sex and Mars and Venus. You stay blessed. Peace.